Welcome back to MountainAdvantures. This week we insulate our van very carefully and no wire gets left behind.
Right, what I've got here is our fluffy plastic bottle insulation made from recycled plastic bottles. It comes in this big massive roll and it's basically the equivalent to your like wool style insulation. You can shove it in all the little crevices, and what I'm doing is I'm poking it into all of these gaps along the sides, and I'll be poking it or attempting to poke it down into these big channels here. I won't be putting it here at the moment because we're planning on having our PIR board cut to those pieces, because the PIR board's got better thermal properties, so it's going to be warmer, keep the van warmer and cooler. So for now I'm just going in with this and shoving it all along. And the important thing with this insulation stuff is to not put in too much, because if you squish it loads like this, it's not going to be able to trap much air, and therefore it's not going to have very good thermal properties. You want it to be in this nice big lofty fluffy state, so don't just cram as much in as will fit. I've managed to insulate all along here with our plastic wool insulation, but these bits here with the conduit are a little bit more tricky to get into. So I've done it here in this gap between here and here, and a big help with that is to have something long and thin to help shove it through the gaps that you can't quite reach with your fingers. And then also down in this gap, you should be able to see that there are a couple of these holes in the middle which are really useful for helping to drag it along and for checking how far along it has got. So let's give it a go over here. There are lots of these little gaps in the van that basically run all the way down. You see they pop out here, and you can try and just feed the insulation through from the top. Maybe you've got a long stick or something and poke it down. But what I've been doing is I've tied a few weights to a bit of string, and then I drop this down the gap and it pops out the bottom, and then I get a strip of insulation that's roughly the right size, tie one end onto my, or tie my string onto one end of the insulation like that, reasonably tight. And then I make sure it's feeding up through the right channel. Like this. Actually, this one's got a bit of a wire in the way. There we go. And then you simply pull it up. And it pops out the top like that. And then, you know, you have insulation basically the whole way down.
With all the awkward gaps in the van plugged with fluff, we can move on to cutting our PIR board. Now we're using a mixture of 25mm and 50mm PIR board between the ceilings and the wall, and that's mainly to account for the curves in the van.
This is what your 50mm looks like when it's all cut up. So that's going to go on all the walls and up on the ceiling. And there was quite a bit of offcuts as well. But that is all of it cut up. What a load of insulation. Look at the amount of space it takes. Whilst Ayesha fills those voids, I'm looking at dry fitting all those sheets that we've cut. So I've just had to cut this one in half, because when it's a solid board you can't get it round into the sides. And we sort of tuck it in, and then hopefully this piece will just fit beautifully. He says. Optimistic.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. It's got the seal of approval.
We are playing grown-up Tetris in the van today. As you can probably see, we've got all these random bits of insulation stuck into these gaps in the van. Now, most of these can't take a full piece of the 50mm PIR board, but they can take a fair amount of 50mm PIR board. So what we're doing is using some of our offcuts of the 50mm and plugging up as much of that as possible, and then we'll put the 25mm pieces in on top of that, and then any gaps or kind of corners or anything that we can't get it into, we're going to stuff with our plastic bottle fluffy insulation.
To secure these boards on, we're using these stick pins, which are basically like a metal spike. So you can either stick that on, skewer the board on, or we're finding it easier currently to stick it through the board and then bend it down. Just a little peel off bit on the back, so that's now very sticky. So I'll position this, get that right where we want it, and then once we're ready, we'll just push it in. And next up, you got these little heads that go on. And so once that's on, it's got like a little almost barbed section, so it won't come off again. So we just push that over. It's a bit stiff, but a bit of a wiggle. That goes on quite nicely. And then we'll just bend this up. So I haven't got the hammer on me, but anything to just bend that up and out the way.
If you're wondering why we're not just putting these boards on in one big piece, that's because the roof of the van curves quite a lot, so if you put it on in one big piece, you end up with bits hanging much lower than those metal ribs. By cutting it up, we can put the individual smaller pieces on at different angles that will hopefully match the curve of the van much better.
We probably should have bought the longer stick pins, because on this 50mm stuff they only just about poke through. So this is one we did manage to do, and that's held on. But then these ones, the plates have fallen off because they don't really stick through far enough. So in an ideal world, we would have bought the longer ones.
As you might or might not be able to see, this piece right next to the fan is going to be a little bit complicated to fit because I've got a wire to deal with, I've got a little bit of conduit stuck out, and I've got these two screws coming down, which are actually the screws that connect our solar panels onto the roof above. So what I'm going to do is decide on roughly where I'm putting it, which will be about here, and then I'm going to measure where the wire is dropping down. This is one of the wires for our light, and I'm going to drill a hole at that point through the board. And then I'm going to also measure for where this little notch of conduit sticking out is, and cut a notch into the insulation board. I don't need to worry about this whole stretch of wire because it runs in a channel that's slightly recessed, so the insulation board is going to sit slightly below that anyway, so not a problem. But I do need to do a bit of measurements to fit this. We've insulated the doors here with a mixture of PIR board and fluffy stuff. As you can see, we've left some kind of big areas free. That's because these doors were an absolute pain to insulate because they've got so many cables and they've got the locking mechanisms and things like that, which you don't really want to jam up with your insulation. So wherever we've been uncertain about fitting stuff or uncertain about stuff moving when the van vibrates and then getting into those areas, we've just left them blank, which It's going to mean our van isn't quite as well insulated, but it's better than having to rip everything out 2 months on the road because we've jammed up our locking mechanism and can't open our door. We're at the end of the day now and I'm packing up. Alex has gone up to do some video editing, but I thought I'd just show you what happens after you spent a day of cutting PIR board. And keep in mind, I wasn't actually the one doing most of the cutting, Alex has been doing most of the cutting. But if I just run you down, you can see I'm absolutely covered in it. I've already had a quick brush down, but it gets absolutely everywhere. On your socks, on your jeans, on your t-shirt. And if you're wearing anything even vaguely fleecy, it's an absolute nightmare. It's all in my hair. It's just, you need a whole session of cleanup at the end of the day. We have pretty much finished fluffy stuffing the walls and the ceiling, or at least as much as we can at the moment. So you can see almost all of the walls are done, and we've got all of our PIR board up here as well. On the ceiling there's still a few gaps, and we've cut all the PIR board for it. It's down here at my feet. But we've run out of the stick pins to stick them up. We did break a few, but I think in all honesty we just didn't quite buy enough. So we're waiting for those to arrive, and we can put those up, fluffy stuff in all the gaps, and we will be done with the insulating. And then we can move on to putting up our reflectix and finishing off the vapor barrier. But that will probably be another video.
The new stick pins are here. Not sure they are frozen products, but maybe we've bought frozen stick pins.
These are the first of our new longer stick pins that have just arrived. You can see they're pretty chunky. I think these are 90 plus. The previous ones we had were about 62 or something. And we're hoping these are going to be much easier to fold over neatly.
And this is an awkward one because we got the cable and then we got the fan
and conduit and all sorts going on.
In here, sorry to block all the shot. So that's fine in there. Okay,
in it goes. And then in theory those stick pins have stuck nicely to the ceiling.
Now, because these are much longer. Oh yes.
Oh, look at
just bend them over by
that.
hand.
No awkwardly trying to whack the very tip with a hammer and missing 20 times.
Yeah, that is
beautiful.
much
easier. Yeah, so if you're wondering what size stick pins to buy for 50mm insulation, the answer is go for the larger 90mm ones. If you've only got 25mm, then the roughly 60mm stick pins are a-okay. They work really well. But the 50mm ones, they're just really too short to be helpful and practical. Right, we've got a few more to put up. Let's get to it.
Now, if you've spotted some mysterious items and holes in the ceiling and the walls of our van, stay tuned for next week where there'll be a video on those.
The van is fully insulated. It took quite a while, but hopefully it'll be well worth it when we're toasty warm in the snow.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next Thursday for another video.
See you then.
Up through nice and straight. Ooh, dramatic. You're waving directly in front of my face. Finished fluffy stuffing the wall. I keep saying fluffy stuffing. Subscribe and we'll see you next time.
Toasty warm.